Bought it for 205, put in 70K renos, got it appraised for 325. Hey everybody, this is Cam Roland. It is Thursday and I'm going live here to talk about creative deals. And specifically, I'm going to be going into two deals that I've done, and I'm going to talk about the numbers, and I'm going to talk about how the negotiating took place, what the end result was. Some of the questions that were posed last week were great. Thanks, Sam, for contributing those. And basically, they're in the description of this is like, what was the asking price? What did you pay? How did you negotiate? What options did you offer? How do you know it's a good deal? All that sort of stuff. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about two deals. The first one will be a single family house, and the other will be a larger deal. And I'll show you in broad strokes what the numbers. I'm not going to have any spreadsheets up. I'm just going to give you broad numbers. I know some of you are spreadsheet geeks and you just want to see that all the data. Today is just an overview, and I'll go into right off the top. I'll just go into the numbers, and then I'll dive into some of the questions around this. So this was a single family house, and it came to me by way of Bird Dog. Okay, so last week we talked a bit about bird dogs. If you don't know what that is, just quickly search it up. Pretty basic. Anybody can be a bird dog and get paid for it, which is awesome. So this was a family who was growing out of their house, like size-wise, not in more kids, but the kids were just getting big and the house was too small. And it didn't show well. It needed a whole bunch of repairs. It had, I think, the original kitchen. I don't know, maybe. It was a 50s built house. Kitchen was really old. And it didn't show well. They had tons of stuff. They weren't hoarders, but they had tons of stuff. I think they had 4 kids, and it just, so it didn't show well. So they knew that to put it on the open market, they were going to have to do a bunch of work to it, including getting a bunch of stuff out. And some people have got the energy to do that. Some people just go, I don't have the energy to do that, right? So this is where we can do some creative problem solving. So the numbers on this house were I negotiated a purchase price of 205K. All right. And so I bought it at that. I put in, let's see here, I put in 70K renos. All right. Okay, so I'm into it for 275 plus closing costs, and of course I've got some lender money in there as well, so I'm paying interest rate on that. And then so we fixed it all up, got it appraised for 325K, and at the same time I did that, I put in a tenant buyer. Okay, so those are the rough numbers. Bought it for 205, put in 70K renos, got it appraised for 325. So if you remember, if you were on last week, this is what I call a burrito. All right. So what I did was I bought the place, I rehabbed it or renovated it. I refinanced it. Let's see here. I'm missing one. I refinanced it, and then I did a rentone on it. So normally what happens is when people do burrs, this guy here is a repeat. So basically what that is when you pull your capital out, you now got that capital again. So for me, I had, I could pull out about 70K and I still left about 50 in the deal, right? Approximate numbers. So I could go and do that again. But so what I did was I did a burrito. Okay, so those are the rough numbers on this house. Now, let me talk about some of the questions specifically about doing this deal. So what was the asking price? That was a good question because they weren't sure. They were exploring, do we sell it privately? Do we put on a, like MLS? I think they were asking 230. And so I got it down to 205. And that's what I paid. I paid 205. So how did it get to that price? So basically, what I did was I pulled comparables. I got a realtor who understands real estate investing, and got him, in this case, to pull comparables of like properties in the same neighborhood. So this was a story and three-quarter house. I know it's weird, story and three-quarter, in a certain area. So he didn't pull any comps on any bungalows or any, two-story, and he tried to keep it, to the similar age. So then what I could do is I could see the range with the comparable. So I think the range was like 170 all the way up to 270, maybe even a little bit higher than 270. But then I was able to go to the owners and say, look, based on the condition of your house, based on these comps, I think it's worth about X. And here's all the work I got to do to it. And, I was actually surprised that I got it so high at 325, because I think with them, I was talking about, high 200s, like just under 300. So basically, I shared with them, what their house is valued based on these real comps, and I show them to them. And then the work I'm going to put into it. And then obviously I got to make some money. And so that becomes a negotiating point. But even before that negotiating point, what happens is I'm building a rapport with these people. So when I get into their house, I get to know them a little bit. They give me the tour of the place. I get to hear kind of what they're thinking, what improvements they've made, any issues, any water issues in the house, or any other, issues. And so I'm building rapport with them, and I'm finding out what their pain points are. Like, what problem do they need solved? So the problem that these guys had is that they needed to sell because they had to go to a bigger house. And they didn't want to go through all the extra effort. They couldn't buy their next house and keep this one, right? Because that would have been great. Then they could have fixed this one after they moved out, but they couldn't do that. So they needed to sell without having to do all the work. They needed me to be flexible on the possession date because they didn't know when they were going to actually find their next place. And so that 205 price, we locked down at a future date with the flexibility of them selling it to me sooner. So I gave them tons of flexibility. I think it was a 5 or 6 month window of flexibility that they had. They ended up exercising the sale after about 2 months because they found a place almost right away. So that was great. So that's how I negotiated with them, was, hearing what their pain points and addressing those, right? So I knew that they need to be flexible in timeline. They knew that they needed to have a commitment that it was sold, and that they needed the capital to get into the next place. So we negotiated that. So that's basically how I negotiated the deal with them. One of the questions is, what options did I present? So on this deal, I didn't present a ton of different options, because often what I'll do is I might come in with, depending on if it's a a landlord or if it's owner occupied. If it's a landlord, then I will often come in with a cash today purchase price, flexible with their terms, obviously in terms of timing, or a little bit of a higher price, but they hold the mortgage for up to 3 years for me. So that's, those are some of the options that I'll do, and I did exactly that on the second deal that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But for these guys, I didn't really present a lot of options. Otherwise, some flex in some of the dates that they wanted, and did it that way. So what money making factors did I consider? Ultimately, was I able to solve their problem and purchase this house and make money on it, right? So as I'm going through the house, as I'm running the numbers, comps, it's going through my mental, grid of, do I want the house? Do I just want to wholesale it? Do I want to do a flip? Do I want to do rent to own? All that sort of stuff, right? So that's going on there. And so, quickly I thought, okay, well, this This probably could be a flip and sell to the market, or it could be, what I did with the burrito. And so that's the factors that I considered when doing that. So when I ran the numbers, I looked at the ARV, which I didn't talk about, but I alluded to it. Right after repair value was right around $300 at 300K at the time. Right. So when I was negotiating with them, I was showing an after repair value with approximately 70K worth of renos was approximately 300. So, I mean, obviously, my 70K, I've got a contingency fund in there. I've put everything in there that I think we might have to do, because we did have to do a couple things that were a little bit more expensive. We had to rewire the whole place to get rid of the knob and tube, all that sort of stuff. So how did I know it was a good deal? Well, basically, because I knew what the after repair value was and my purchase price, knowing that my top end of my renos would be 70. Okay, so I'm going to make some money on here, roughly 20 grand. That's kind of my minimum benchmark with, the high repair value and all that stuff. So I did much, much better than that. I did, closer to 50 grand on the overall deal. So that's how I did that deal. If you got questions about deal number one, just put them in the chat. I'll come back to the chat in a bit, but say deal number one and then ask your question. I'll be happy to come back to that. So let me move on to deal number two. So deal number two is I